right, so we are looking at we're looking at our day 10 lesson here, and it is titled Exercise and Health Benefits. So this is actually going to be, today, and then what we're going to talk about tomorrow is going to be sort of the end of our conversation in exercise physiology. Then we'll have our in-person meeting on Monday. But looking at this, if we're talking about, or if we look at like what our journey has been so far, we talked very much heavily about like the structural components in the first half of class, and then we started kind of getting into the more practical side of things. So looking at how like today's lesson, now that we have a pretty good understanding of the overall physiology of things, we're going to look at like how understanding that will lead to, all of the health benefits that come along with exercise, right? So like by understanding like, because we say it all the time, like exercise is so good for you. Well, why, right? Like, why is it good for us, right? Well, because of all the stuff that it does physiologically in your body. And so, we are going to be looking at like some of the kind of common the common methods that we're going to use to kind of describe the health benefits that come along with exercise. So looking at it today, we're going to talk about some of the diseases and disabilities that come along with physical inactivity, which is sort of the opposite of what we're going for. Describe the role that regular exercise plays in terms of health benefits. So we are going to talk about like how and why exercise is so good for us. What constitutes a sedentary lifestyle? So we will talk a little bit about like what it means if your client is very sedentary, if they're not moving very much. And then we're going to understand this concept called exercise is medicine. We'll talk more about that in the special populations class. We've talked about that. That's really where we spend a lot of time on the whole EIM initiative and stuff. But just this idea that like exercise is sort of the best form of medicine simply because physical activity just leads to really positive physiologic changes inside the body. And that's what we kind of want to like get our clients sort of on board with. And then we'll talk a little bit about like how regular exercise has very positive benefits on life expectancy and what it means to become physically active. How do we get our clients physically active? What are the fit principles, right? So this is a little bit less about being on an OPT template, right? How many freaking learning objective pages are there? Just trying to make this PowerPoint longer. So like one of the big thing that we're gonna talk about is like getting our clients like physically active. It's not always about like necessarily going to the gym. Sometimes it's about being physically active. I just saw this article this morning, actually. It's funny that we're talking about this now. But it was like why exercising outside is important. And it was talking about just like maybe going to the gym. Let's go to the news section because I just saw that. No, I'm not seeing the thing I was doing. But anyway, like it was just talking about like what you can do outside and how beneficial that is for other reasons other than just, physical activity. So we will talk a little about like how to kind of get our clients a little bit more physically active, how it leads to, improvements in VO2 and things like that, how we can use VO2 to prescribe intensity, or we can use other methods as well. We'll talk about what those other methods are. And then the health benefits of, building muscle strength, but also like building power and endurance, right? And then, yeah. So that's kind of what we're going over today. We got a lot of different stuff, but honestly, if you take a look at it, you'll notice that like a lot of it is about prescribing intensity, and a lot of it is about monitoring how hard your client is working. And then you can see we're also talking a little bit about like some of the diseases that come along with like a sedentary lifestyle. So we know, and this by the way, is not a direct chapter in your textbook. Like there's no exercise health benefits chapter, but if you read chapter 1, it has a ton of statistics on like where the health industry is and why we see so many people being physically inactive, what that's causing, what it's kind of leading to, and things like that. So that is something that we are still looking at in your regular book. It's just that this PowerPoint, these slides don't directly go to any chapter, but all of this content is sort of covered in that very first chapter of your textbook. So if you do want to kind of piggyback on today's lesson, that would be a good follow-up. So talking about being overweight, right? Well, how do we define overweight, right? Is it based on how someone looks? Is it based on how they feel? Well, medically, it's simply based on a number, right? And that number is, however much you weigh in relation to your height. Okay. So overweight is going to be defined as having more body fat than would be considered like optimal. Typically, we characterize this medically as a BMI anywhere from 25 to 29.9. Okay. So a quote unquote normal BMI should be anywhere from about 18.5 to 24.9. That is what we say when we see like a normal BMI. This is where we see generally the healthiest populations. When they fall between a BMI from here to here, they're generally, we see longer life expectancy. We see less instances of diseases. Whereas like if we fall into the underweight category, there's a lot of diseases that are associated with that. Overweight, there's a lot of diseases associated with that. And then obese individuals with a BMI of greater than 30, we know that there's like a really big increase in terms of like morbidity and mortality. So, being overweight is not necessarily great for you. Now being obese is like really dangerous. Now, here's one thing to be aware of. Obviously, this is a simple formula. If you look at your body mass index, your BMI formula, it is the weight of an individual in kilograms divided by their height in meters squared. Okay. So this formula right here, I know we've talked about this a million times, but Paula, I think this is your first time hearing this. This is one you want to have memorized. Keep this formula in your head. BMI equals weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared, because you might just get a question that's like, blank. Oops. Formula best describes, and then you'd have A, B, C, and D. So that is sort of like what you'll get a lot of questions like that. And so we want to be able to kind of spot this formula. You don't necessarily need to be able to do the math in your head. They're never going to ask you to do math on your NASM test. It's not like calculate this person's BMI. They weigh this many pounds, and you're not going to have to do that. But you will have to recognize the formula. So weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. You'll also sometimes see I call it the dumb American version, which is like weight in pounds divided by your height in inches squared, and then you multiply the whole number by 703. That'll also give you your BMI, which is easier for us to do, but like it's actually, I don't know, it's actually harder. That is the overall formula we're looking at to determine this. Now, based on that, right, what are the two things that we're taking? We're only taking into account someone's weight and someone's height. So if we had someone who is like short and muscular, right, like, somebody who's maybe like 5'5" and just like very muscular. Actually, one of my favorite bodybuilders on YouTube, he's an exercise physiologist, Jeff Nippard. He is so short. 5'5". Yeah, he's 5'5". But he weighs 158 pounds, right? So if we go like BMI calculator here, let's go ahead and put this in. He is 5'5" and 158 pounds. That puts him in the overweight category. It's a BMI of 26.3. So this guy right here, who is in incredible shape, would be considered overweight. I mean, he's literally like, famous for bodybuilding. So it's not the world's greatest calculation. This should not be used to actually judge someone's health. It's just one of those things that's putting you at increased risk, right? So like if you're playing roulette, you're putting a couple extra chips down, which is going to increase your risk of winning in that case. But in this case, like the more things that you do, this is why BMI is part of a comprehensive assessment process, right? We test their BMI. If it's overweight, well, then let's test their body fat percentage, which we should be doing anyways, right? So then we test their body fat percentage. We see that it's well within healthy ranges. It's like, okay, that means that like, yes, you are overweight, but you are like proportionally exactly, you know, where we want you to fall. So that is one thing to be aware of. But if you don't have time for that, or if you are like the government who's trying to look at like large scale populations, the BMI is a really good indicator of just simply, you know, because most people are not bodybuilders, right? Most people who have an overweight BMI are often actually overweight. So anyway, these are the numbers you need to get memorized. You need to have this formula memorized, and then you need to know anything less than 18.5 is underweight. Anything between 18.5 and 24.9 is considered normal weight. And then 25 to 29.9 is overweight, with greater than 30 being obese. Now, if you just remember a couple pieces of information, this is sort of like my guide to memorizing this, right? Let's see here. I'll put this in here. How to memorize. Right. So if you can remember that like normal equals 18.5 to 24.9, and then obese is greater than 30. If you keep those two pieces of information in your head, you can figure out the rest of them, right? So all you really have to pay attention to is this number here and anything greater than 30. Because if it's greater than 30, we know it's obese. 31, yeah, obese. 32, yeah, absolutely, right? Like the higher we go, right? And then we know that like normal weight ends at 24.9. So what's in between normal and obese? Well, that would be the overweight category. So picking up right up at 25, going up to 29.9. And then anything under that 18.5 is considered underweight, which is also very, very, very dangerous. In some ways, is arguably more dangerous, actually. Whoops, has more long-term lasting problems. So how did this happen? How do we, you know, if we look at obesity statistics, right? And we're going to look at this later in this module as well, but like, you know, if I just look at obesity statistics through the years, right? In 2017, the number of obese individuals was 42%. That's a lot of individuals, right? Yeah, we can see right here, if we look at like, here's our overall obesity statistics, you know, in these areas that are like dark red, more than 35% of the population is obese. And then areas that are green, it's like anywhere up to 25%, but like between 20 and 20. So just Colorado and freaking DC, those are the only two states left that are falling into, you know, not even that great of a category, you know, like that's still, there's lots of obesity there. So, you know, it's obvious. So how does this keep happening? Well, you know, a big part of it is obviously, yeah, like there's food out there and stuff, you know, like we have a lot of access to fast food, which is not very good for us. You know, it's very energy dense food, you know, but it's not exactly like nutritionally dense. You know, it has plenty of calories in it, but it doesn't exactly have, you know, vitamins or minerals or all the things that like help us sustain life. That's not good for us. But one of the biggest things that we're seeing is just an increase in this sedentary lifestyle. We're seeing more increasingly sedentary people. As technology improves and as our lives get easier, unfortunately, that means that like we don't do things that burn as many calories, you know? My parents are antique people. They love antiques. And they love to go like antiquing and stuff. And my mom had this, she just thought it was a cool decoration, like an old school washboard. Ours kind of looks, yeah, something kind of like this. And it was just like, you know, it was a friggin' wash. And what you do is you put your clothes on it and you scrape it against this thing and it gets all the dirt out. And my mom, when I was, she only did it twice to me, but when I was misbehaving very badly, made me use that when I was always in charge of doing like laundry. That was like one of my chores. But like there was times where like she made me, let me tell you guys, it sucked. Like it was hard, you know, especially because I was a little kid with little kid arms. I was like, this is exhausting, you know, like, and man, she was so mad at me that First time she made me use that thing. I had gotten into a literal mud fight uh, with the neighbor kids. Completely ruined my clothes. But yeah, like that's, that is that was hard work. It burned a lot of calories. Imagine if that was like your everyday in and out. But now it's like, I don't know, you toss your laundry in, you hit a button and you walk away for a couple hours, come back and switch it, right? It doesn't exactly burn as much energy as it used to. We have dishwashers, we have, washing machines. We have all these things that make our lives easier. But unfortunately, it means that like we are missing out on the physical activity that keeps us healthy. So due to increasingly sedentary lifestyles and improvements in technology, people are simply just not burning as much energy throughout the day. And that's not very good for us. This is why it's very important to have like certain hobbies that do burn lots of energy. So looking at sort of the flip side of this, well, like we said, like life expectancy is going to be directly related to, your physical activity levels, right? What is that darn quote? If anybody knows this quote before I finish, before I say it, let me know, because I think I'm going to butcher it. But it's like, you don't die because you don't stop moving because you die because you stop moving. I heard something like that. And it's a great phrase. It's a really meaningful, powerful thing, because like, yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. When you stop moving around, it leads to so many different problems. One of the statistics that we see in our senior fitness program design class, which is on the other sort, actually, a couple months away, is when we see individuals who have like hip fractures. So a senior will have like a hip fracture, and the mortality rate associated over the next year after that hip, and I mean like, full, like, break your freaking hip. The mortality rate that's associated with that is around 25%. So that's like 1 in 4 people. It's pretty freaking high. And they've looked at it and they're like, why is it that like the hip? Is it because like the hip makes a lot of red blood cells? Like, what is it that causes it? It's like, no, it's just that's one of the most painful breaks you can experience, because there's no, relief from the aches and the pains. So you just spend all day in bed. So then while these people are recovering, they're just being physically inactive. And that is what gets them, like the being physically active. We see everything about their health take a nosedive after that. So this is just one more reason for us to like want to stay up on our feet as long as we can. We want to see lots of physical activity. Also, obviously, yeah, nutritional habits are huge, right? We do know that like poor nutritional habits are also going to affect how much you move around. Like if you have a very unhealthy diet, you're not going to feel very good, and you're not going to want to move around very much. That's not going to help. Or maybe it gives you like a big burst of energy, but then makes you completely lethargic later. Nutritional habits do absolutely play a role. And then smoking is one of the absolute craziest things that you can do. It blows me away that smoking is still a thing. Like, it's amazing to me that people, and then vaping too, like both of those things, we know, like there's no argument. Like this isn't a two-sided conversation. It's like, no, smoking is measurably and objectively bad for you. And it's like, well, it makes you look really cool. And it's like, not talking about health, like, well, what about like the stress that it relieves? It's like, no, it actually causes more stress in the long term. Like there has no benefits. It has none. So that's definitely one that we're seeing as well. Like it's smoking, it lowers your life expectancy like crazy. So life expectancy very much directly affected by your physical activity levels, your nutritional habits, and smoking. If you have low physical, if you're participating in these 3 things, what can happen? Well, it can lead to sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is a decrease in the number of your muscle fibers. So yesterday we talked about how we have hypertrophy, which is the larger muscle fibers, right? Like your muscle fibers growing. And there's hyperplasia, which is like having more muscle fiber cells. We don't necessarily actually train for that. We don't do anything to make us create more cells. but we do have something that makes us get rid of cells, and that's sarcopenia, which is not awesome, right? Again, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So not being physically active results in like a loss of muscle fibers, and we see that sarcopenia. Osteoporosis is another one, right? A decrease in bone density. We know that like the physical activity associated with like being physically active, you know, or by like working out regularly, it puts stress on your bones. And yeah, stress obviously, you know, creates damage, but this is the good type of damage that then your immune system repairs. And just like with your muscles, your immune system doesn't repair it back to where it was. It repairs it to make it a little bit stronger and a little bit more resistant to damage in the future. And that's what we're going to see in, you know, osteoporosis. We're trying to avoid that, right? We want to be physically active. Actually, just speaking about osteoporosis here in the beginning, if you guys have ever seen, this is kind of an interesting thing. You can get certified in this. It's a group exercise style of classes where you can get a certification for what is called the power plate. Have you guys ever seen these? They're these interesting little vibrating pads. This is kind of like the new versions. They're kind of taking away the arm part, but the original version of the power plate looked like this. It was this, you know, had like little handles on it, and it's this machine that basically vibrates at a really high frequency, and then you work out on this machine. So like you would do, you know, your squats and, you know, maybe some twists and like little thing. I mean, I guess this is maybe just a warm up that I'm looking at. But basically you do exercise while you're on this vibrating plate. And this has been shown to have really positive effects on bone density in particular. In terms of like increasing bone density, this is a type of exercise that has been shown to go bonkers. So if you have a history of osteoporosis, or if it runs in your family, this might be something for you to look into. And it's kind of fun. It's just this little plate that like, you know, vibrates really, really fast while you're doing, you know, your squats on that. I wonder if there's any power plate classes near me.
Yeah, how do you get certified?
You would go on their website and find a workshop. I'm sure that they do them all around the country at different times of the year.
Is it so plate fit is the name of it?
It's called the power plate.
Power plate, okay.
I don't know if this is true. They're saying it's at Speakeasy. I've been to Speakeasy, and I always get really excited when I see a power plate, and I don't remember seeing one. There's Plate Fit West Hollywood. That's, oh my God, that has to be one. But yeah, you'll find them in, they're expensive pieces of machines, but there's also like, I don't know, this is what's kind of interesting. I've seen cheaper versions of this now that the tech has been around for a little bit longer, but like here's the original, right? It's this big honking machine. But I have seen sort of like imitators, and I wonder how effective those imitators are, because like you'll hear, I'm sure the power plate, you know, I'm sure that anybody certified in it, I'm sure the company would be like, no. Our frequency is different. You know, we do it different. You know, it's the specific this and that. But I wonder, you know, how much one of those knockoff ones is actually like, if that's somewhat close. You know, I've had students bring in like vibration training platform. I've had students bring in like these little, you know, yeah, versions that look like this. That's $1,000, so that's still kind of expensive, but certainly cheaper than, I think the power plate's like $7,000 or between like 7 and 10 grand. But yeah, I've had students bring in these versions. Yeah, it's $150. I wonder how effective that would also be, you know, even at just like a cheap side of things. And I'm not certified in this, so I'm no expert, but I do know it's been around for years now, and consistently the evidence has shown that it is actually quite good for osteoporosis. Here's a weird fact for the day. I feel like that's actually kind of the same technology. They've been looking into this for healing bones faster. So weird fact about cats. I know we're in a weird spot. But cats' bones actually heal faster than a lot of other animals out there in like the animal kingdom. And they think that the reason why is because cats will purr, because they'll actually purr a lot when they are injured, which seems kind of weird. You think purring is associated with like the cat being happy. It's actually not true. Sometimes they'll actually purr when they're in danger or when they are like in a very stressful situation, and it will heal them, is what they think, right? They think that it like leads to them like healing faster. And the theory is that like the frequency of those vibrations are just rattling their bones a little bit, causing the healing factor. And they've looked into creating like casts that like slightly vibrate at a specific frequency at certain times to see if it like heals the bones faster. But I think that that's pretty fringe science at this point. I doubt that they've figured that out just yet. But we're always looking for faster ways to heal bones. That's one a very effective way. So that's osteoporosis. It's always kind of a fun one to talk about. There's depression that's associated with like physical inactivity. When I say depression, I mean like medically diagnosed depression. I'm talking about somebody maybe having like poor body image, which can lead to anxiety and obviously is a very serious condition. But like, I mean like clinical depression where there is a dopamine receptor problem, right? Like we know that physical activity, inactivity, I don't know about you guys, but I can always tell like we just went through like a year of quarantine, right? I can always tell like when my mental health is not, when I'm not doing so well, when I like, if I'm just looking at like my stats and I'm like, man, I haven't moved at all today. And it's like when I'm very sedentary, I'm also usually like I'm having like one of my worst days, you know. And so yeah, there's definitely like a link between like being physically active and fighting off things like depression. And then coronary heart disease. This is obviously probably the biggest one. This is hugely associated with physical activity. This is hugely associated with poor diet and smoking. But remember, this is blockage of your coronary arteries, right? So coronary heart disease is where if you have, the arteries that supply your heart itself with blood, you clogged them with stuff, right? Like there's plaque that just like built up and now blood can't get through. And so, this can lead to an actual like heart attack, right? Where basically the cells in the heart actually die because they're suffocating, right? Our cells need oxygen to stay alive. So coronary heart disease, stroke is another one. High blood pressure is another one. Diabetes, this is obviously associated with physical inactivity because like we are not burning glucose as a fuel source. So then whenever we eat glucose, which we do a lot in this country and everywhere, gets into your blood, your body breaks it down into sugars, and then has to say, okay, well, what are we going to do with this sugar? Well, let's create some insulin and then drive it out of the blood, right? And so it'll either get turned into glycogen or it's going to get turned into body fat. If you're never burning through your glycogen because you're physically inactive, this is why physical activity has been shown to be so good for diabetes, right? It enhances your insulin sensitivity. By being physically active, you burn through your blood sugar, you burn through your glucose as a fuel. And then your body goes, great, give us some more glucose. And then when you bring glucose in, your body goes, great, you produces insulin. Insulin turns it into glycogen instead of turning it into adipose or fat tissue. And that's exactly sort of what we're going for. Asthma, the shortness of breath feeling that some people have has been improved through like physical activity. We know physical inactivity can sometimes lead to like adult onset asthma. And then hypertension or just high blood pressure in general, right? Like a client who has, elevated blood pressure. Again, if you start filling your arteries with plaque, there's stuff in the tube and, now stuff can't travel the way it's supposed to. And so what's going to happen? It's like holding your thumb over your hose. It creates more pressure, which is great if you're trying to like, spray somebody out there. But like if you're just trying to get like water to come out the hose, it's not very effective, right? We don't want to have high blood pressure. So all of those are bad. All of those are scary. How do we avoid them? Let's start moving, right? All right, well, great. We know to start moving. How should I move? That's what we're going to look at next. So prescription considerations. When I say prescription, I mean exercise prescription considerations. Obviously, again, just reiterating, we don't prescribe anything except for exercise, right? We are not prescribing food. We're definitely not prescribing medicine, therapy, any of that kind of stuff. But we can absolutely tell people how to increase their physical activity. So how do we do that, right? Well, any new client who's becoming physically active, first thing they should do, if they do have any of these health conditions, before they even hit onto the gym floor, make sure they get a medical evaluation. Okay. Make sure they absolutely have clearance from their doctor before they engage in any new physical activity, because it could be inappropriate for them. They may be in such a severe medical state that, you know, it's not safe for them to participate in an intense exercise program. So always make sure they get a medical evaluation if they do have any of those diseases. If that can't be afforded, or if they, you know, say like, yeah, I've already kind of done this, well, then you can begin with like a low intensity, simple walking program. You know, that's where it begins, guys. Go for a freaking walk. I know it sounds like, you know, oh, well, that's not exercise. That's just getting, you know, that's just why we walk every day. It is exercise. It's 100% exercise. And you may be really good at walking, but it does still burn a certain amount of energy, right? So taking up like a low intensity walking program can be really helpful. Doing a little bit of stretching beforehand, and then eventually maybe even take up jogging, right? That's where it starts. If you're trying to encourage someone to simply get physically active, these are good places for it. Then we can get a little bit more specific about things. Then we can actually look at like how we prescribe stuff. So Paul, I warned you, we were going to talk about the FIT principles again. Well, here they are, right? Now, I will say the Exercise is Medicine initiative doesn't use the full FIT principles. They're really just kind of focusing on these big three: type, intensity, and duration. So first thing is type, right? The type of exercise is technically irrelevant when it comes to just increasing overall physical activity, right? If we're just trying to like burn a certain amount of energy throughout the day, I don't care how you do it. You know, you could do it in the gym by working really, really hard for an hour, or you could absolutely just do it at home. Maybe going through for a walk a couple times, you know, throughout the day, you know, taking a break from working. You know, we're all working from home right now, right? Take a break, walk out your door, come back, you know, like that's totally okay. So that is very much like the type can be irrelevant, but obviously going back to what we talked about in the rest of this course, specific is always better, right? Eventually we get into the very specific versions of exercise and activity and stuff. So that's also really big. But for now, if it's irrelevant when it comes to just increasing like your overall like well-being, right? So getting into good shape, right? We're just trying to get people out the door and moving. My neighbor approached me a couple months ago and was like, hey, like we have this like local news thing, you know, this like that we kind of put out and publish, and that, you know, would you want to write an article on like how to stay healthy during like quarantine and like how to get physically active? And I was like, yeah. And I kept it really, really, really simple. I was literally just like, hey, if you want to get physically active, like just get out the door and start moving a little bit, do a little bit of stretching before and after. And then I put the simplest program together, which was literally just a walking program. It wasn't even like do squats, do deadlifts. It wasn't a workout program. It was literally just an article about like start moving. That's where it starts, you know. You are, you know, the amount of energy that you are not accounting for that is lost every day just simply by being inactive has really negative health benefits on us. And then you should always consider, like when you're considering type, consider, you know, the individual that you are like training. What are they into? You know, if walking is not necessarily the best option for them, and they need something that is more intense, okay, great. Like let's look into like jogging or, you know, something else. Like I've had clients who are like, I don't have all day to like walk. And it's like, well, if you did something more intense, you could do it in half the time, you know. The physical activity recommendations in the US, which we're going to see down here in just a second, is about 150 minutes of physical activity per week. or it can be 75 minutes a day if that intensity is a little bit more moderate or a little bit high. So maybe you don't decide to go for like a 20-minute walk on your lunch break and then you only have 10 minutes to eat. Maybe you just go do, the stairs you're working on the top floor. Take the stairs all the way down, take the stairs all the way back up. That'll be high intensity. You'll be pretty freaking out of breath and it'll probably only take you 5 minutes. Then you'll have the rest of your lunch break, that you can use. There's always like some solution for like being a little bit more physically active throughout the day. We just need to, be clever about how we come up with it. So talking about intensity is determined by the frequency. Frequency is obviously how often you are engaging in this activity. So if you're doing it 5 to 7 days per week, chances are your intensity is going to be pretty low. But if you only have time to do it 3 to 5 days per week, well, then your intensity has to be much, much, much higher, right? Steady state cardio, that's great every day. But high intensity cardio, which works a lot more muscle, gets you the same results in half the time, which is awesome. So if the intensity is low, your frequency should be anywhere from 5 to 7 days per week. But if your intensity is much higher, we can lower that frequency down to 3 to 5. Sounds a lot better than me. I love working out, but like, I don't want it to take all freaking day, like I said, the recommended frequency and duration for exercise in the US, according to the USDA according to the CDC, is going to be 150 minutes per week of low intensity exercise or 75 minutes per week of moderate to high intensity exercise. Okay. 150 minutes per week, that's just 30 minutes a day. Go for a 30-minute walk, 5 days, and then not even every day. That's Monday through Friday. That's enough to have really positive benefits. You don't have 30 minutes. All right, do something intense for 15 minutes, right? I've talked about this before, but you guys know what a Tabata is? So a Tabata is it's 8 rounds of 20 seconds of work followed by 10 seconds of rest. So you take a look right here, actually, you can kind of see this is a version that somebody put together. Not saying this is the best workout ever, but she's doing high knees and tricep chops, right? So she does 20 seconds of high knees, then she rests for 10 seconds, and then she does 20 seconds of triceps, rest for 10 seconds, and then she repeats. And she would do that for 4 rounds each for a total of 8 rounds. 8 rounds, 20 seconds plus 10 seconds at 30 seconds. This took 4 minutes. Exactly. Knowing how to do a Tabata, guys, all of you guys, Tabatas are a really helpful tool for you, not only because they're a great way to like burn calories very quickly, but also they are a great tool when you have a client and maybe your workout, you just didn't time it right. And you're like, man, we moved through that workout really fast. This person has like time left on their session. How am I going to fill that time? You can always fill it with more stretching and, mobility work, but you could also, if their goal is to burn a lot of calories, you'd be like, all right, at the end here, we're just going to get a quick little calorie boost. It takes exactly 4 minutes. So it makes it really easy to time out. If you look at the clock and you're like, I've got 10 minutes. It's like, all right, we're going to do a double Tabata, right? And then boom, 8 minutes is gone. You spend 2 minutes checking them out at the gym, getting their next appointment set up, and there you go. There's a really good tool to have in your back pocket. Learn how to do these Tabatas. And there's Tabata timers out there. And it just looks like this, right? 8 rounds. And you just hit start here. And it'll be like, it's going to count down for 10 seconds. And then, and you can set custom versions.
3, 2, 1.
Oh my God, that's loud. Sorry. Anyway, that's going to go for 20 seconds. And then eventually it'll say, all right, rest in the last 10 seconds. And it'll just go for 8 rounds. You can see it's kind of working its way through here. So she did high knees for 20, and then she's alternating. You do the same exercise for 20 seconds and 10. And then we would do like the slow mountain climbers, right? And then she paired that up with lunges. So that's another 4 minutes right there. Then we did looks like leg raises plus push-ups. That's another 4 minutes right there. And then flutter kicks and a plank. That's another 4 minutes right there. So that's 16 minutes of high intensity work, which if you were to do 16 minutes of high intensity work, 5 days per week, right? How many minutes is that overall? 16 times 5, 80 minutes, which is, and it's high intensity, which is exactly the number of minutes necessary to fight off most diseases. It's not that bad, right? That's not that bad at all. Tabatas are a really helpful tool. I've instructed people to use those for years now. We would also, I remember I told you yesterday, we would do the Moby flower thing in class normally. Well, today we would pair that up and we would be doing the, I would do a Tabata squat challenge. You want to do a really hard Tabata squat challenge? Instead of just doing 20 seconds of squats and then resting for 10 seconds and just repeating for 8 rounds, what you do is you do 20 seconds of squats, and then for the 10 seconds, you hold in the bottom of a squat. And then you go, and man, by the end of it, it's like your legs feel like they're gonna blow up. It's a fun one. So that's your intensity. Then we've got duration. This is another fun one. So duration is the how long you are participating in this physical activity, right? So duration is the length of time. Like I said, it's usually for an exercise session, somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes. But that could be something that your client needs to build up to, because a lot of people won't necessarily be able to handle that aerobic state for such an extended period of time. So instead, if we were to break it up, right? If I had a client who I'm trying to get them to be physically active 30 minutes a day, right? But they can't do 30 minutes of walking. Well, if they were to walk for 10 minutes, 3 times a day, what do you think their calorie burn would look like in comparison to somebody who does 30 minutes straight? Little pop quiz for you guys, little class discussion here. If I had 2 clients and one of them walks for 30 minutes straight and the other person walks for 10 minutes 3 times a day, who burns the most calories? See if anybody can answer. You guys with me?
Yeah.
What do you think? Out of those 2 people.
The first one. Actually, kind of equal.
Yeah. So the thing is, it's both 30 minutes of walking. The time, thumbs up. The time is the same, right? The time is literally identical for both.
Mm-hmm.
Which means the calories burned is identical for both. Now, is the person who's walking 10 minutes 3 times a day building their endurance the same way as the 30-minute person? No, right? So they're not developing. I'm not saying you can learn how to run a marathon by running 1 mile and then taking a 10-minute break and then running another mile and taking a 10-minute break. That's not going to help you run a marathon. But that won't do the endurance. But in terms of calorie burn, they're identical. So if our goal is simply to burn a little bit of energy, I don't care if you go for 30 minutes straight. I don't care if you can't do, like I don't have time to do 30 minutes of walking. All right, well, do you have time to do 10 minutes of walking? And can you find 3 10-minute windows in the day? That might be something a little bit more manageable. So it is actually the same in the end. So then we got our fit principles here. Just want to mention these one more time. So when considering these variables, NASM is going to break it down a little bit further into FITTE, that's frequency, intensity, time, type, and enjoyment. So frequency is the number of sessions in a time period. Intensity is the level of demand. Time is the length of time spent. So 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. Type is the mode, and enjoyment is the level of pleasure. So those are your fit principles. You want to have all of these memorized as well in terms of definitions. Probably not necessarily for this course. I don't think we have any, maybe we do. But I can't remember if we have fit principle questions in this class. But in general, these are really good terms to know. And luckily, they come up in practically every class that we teach. So you'll have plenty of time to see them. Now, when it comes to prescribing exercise intensity, obviously there's a lot of different ways you can do this. In my opinion, most accurate version is using the sort of gold standard is using what is called the Karvanen method, which is going to give you their target heart rate. So when I say target heart rate, I just mean like the number I'm trying to hit. So if I knew that like my client is like 60 years old, right? I would take 220 minus their age. So that gives me 160. Why did I pick 220? It's always 220. So to figure out a client's max heart rate, their heart rate max, it is 220 minus whatever their age is. So if they're 30, 220 minus 30. If they are 50, 220 minus 50, right? So if my client's 50, then their max heart rate's 170. If I want them to work out at a percentage of that heart rate max, let's say 75%, well, then I would say, all right, Jim, I want you to be at 128 for the next 30 minutes. That's not bad. But the problem with that formula, that's the heart rate max formula, the classic heart rate max formula. The problem with that formula is that it doesn't take into account your client's individual like differences, right? It doesn't take into account like, well, what if your client is 50 but in really good shape, right? Or what if your client is 50 and in terrible shape? They both get the exact same target heart rate. And it's like, okay, well, now we're not being very accurate. So instead, we have this formula right here, your heart rate reserve method. Heart rate reserve method. This is sometimes called the Karvanen method. And this is going to be the difference between your max heart rate, which is 220 minus your age, and your resting heart rate. So now it's like, oh, okay, well, this person's resting heart rate is 50. This person's resting heart rate is 70, right? It's like those are drastically different from one another. So that is going to help us determine intensity that way. So what we do, the formula is a little bit more complicated, but it's going to be your target heart rate is going to equal your max heart rate minus your resting heart rate. Then you multiply it by the intensity. And then because you took the resting heart rate out, because you subtracted it earlier, you got to add it back on at the end. So if I had a client who was 50, right, that'd be 220 minus 50. That would give me a max heart rate of 170. And then I would subtract their resting heart rate. Let's say 60 beats per minute. They're in pretty good shape, right? So 170 minus 60, that gives me 110. Remember, my target was 75%. So I go times, oops, son of a 220 minus 50 minus another 60 times 0.75. There's my 75%. That gives me a target heart rate of 82.5, which is obviously very low. So what I need to do is I need to add on the resting heart rate back at the end. We said it was 60, so 82 plus 60. So now their target heart rate's 142.5. So instead of 128, now it's 142. Very different, right? Very much a different target because that person's in really good shape. So we can push them a little bit harder. So here's where we broke it down, right? Our client is 30 years old. Their resting heart rate was 75, and their max heart rate is 190, right? How do we know it's 190? 220 minus 30-year-old, that gives us 190. Our desired intensity is anywhere from 65% to 75%. So what we did is we took their heart rate reserve, and what we did is we took 190, that's their max heart rate. We subtracted his resting heart rate of 75, multiplied it by 65%, then added the 75 back on. That gave me 149.75. And then when we did the same thing, the exact same formula, but with 0.75 for 75%, that gave us 161.25. So I would say my client's target heart rate is like, I'm going to round up. I'm going to say, all right, well, I want you anywhere between 150 and 161. That is the best way to prescribe intensity, in my opinion. Prescribing it based entirely on that heart rate reserve method is not only very easy, but it's also very accurate. And for the record, if you guys don't want to do all that math, there's a million apps on the App Store, and there's a million calculators out there. So if you type in heart rate reserve calculator, There's a million links here, but you could also just type in Carvenin calculator, which is, I think, faster. And here we go, right? Where's our client? They were 30 years old, heart rate of 75. So 30, 75, calculate. And guess what? There's my 65% to 75%, 150 to 161. What if I want to make it more intense? Great, do it, right? They want to get done in 15 minutes. Let's get them up to 80%, right? I would say, hey, I want your heart rate to be above 167. So I would prescribe my client very specifically what I'm trying to get their target heart rate to be, okay? Any questions on that, guys? Nothing? Okay. So let's take a look at using VO2 max. That's another option, right? VO2 max is, using a certain percentage of how much oxygen you are capable of consuming. So if you gave a client a VO2 test, right? So you actually put them on like a VO2 machine and you measured that out specifically, right? And then you got a printout. No. Come on, give me VO2 test results. Give me a picture. There we go. So let's say this is the printout here, right? And you can see what your client's VO2 max is and what their different heart rate zones are, right? We know that for the low zone, they'd be anywhere from a heart rate of 88 to 137. So that's like a walking program. That'd work pretty well. Burns enough calories, right? Get them somewhere around 137. But then if you want to make sure that they're working a little bit harder, right? Maybe in like a steady state, but like cardio, right? We'd say, all right, well, now I want your heart rate to be between 137 and 142. That's going to burn a substantial amount of calories per hour. If I'm trying to improve their cardio, I want them to get anywhere from 142 to 180. And if I want to improve their peak performance, anywhere over 180 to 192. And you can see how many calories per hour they're burning at those heart rate ranges. When their heart rate's 190, they're burning 1,335 calories an hour. That's a lot. But if their heart rate's only around 80, they're only burning 235 calories per hour. So it's kind of fun, right? We can use this to actually prescribe a percentage of their VO2 max, right? I know how much oxygen they are consuming or how much oxygen they are capable of consuming when they're working really hard. So now I can tie that to their heart rate and say, all right, well, I want you to be about 40% of your VO2 max, right? And that is going to correspond with a heart rate of, we'll say, I don't know, 135 beats per minute, right? Now, targeting your VO2 max is pretty difficult because like it requires monitoring your VO2 max and your oxygen consumption, which most people can't do in a gym setting, which is why we tie it back to the heart rate conversation. So if you have a VO2 test, that's actually my favorite way to prescribe intensity, but most people will not have access to that in like a traditional gym setting. And if that's the case, then, that's fine. Use the Carvenin method, right? Carvenin method's great. Now, what if all that seems really difficult? Let's say your client doesn't have a heart rate monitor and they always try to test their heart rate, but they can't figure out how to do it properly. Well, you can use what is called the RPE scale. This is the rating of perceived exertion scale. And this is another scale that you guys want to have memorized, trust me. But this basically, by definition, involves rating a specific exercise based on the perception of exertion. So you're going to ask your client how difficult they think it is, right? So you'll sometimes hear this also referred to as the Borg scale. And what the Borg scale is it is just a subjective, however you feel about how difficult the exercise is. It's a rating anywhere from 6 to 20. I know that seems really weird, by the way. People are like, who starts at, why not 1 to 10? Who starts a scale at number 6? And who goes to 20? The reason they did that is because technically, like in their subjects where they were like first studying this, it was like 60 beats per minute in the heart rate. That's like sleeping. That's a 0 on the Borg scale. 70 beats per minute, 80 beats per minute, 90. It's like okay, exercise begins around like 130 beats per minute for most people, for most average people. Um, if you've ever, that's just the reason behind why it is such a weird scale. But the Borg scale is really helpful. It can tell, okay, I want you to work between like somewhat hard and hard, but I don't want it to be very hard. So on a scale of 6 to 20, I want you to be between like a 13 and a 15. That's a great way to describe to your client what you mean when you say like moderate intensity physical activity, right? I don't need you to get completely out of breath. I just need you to walk a little bit, right? So maybe your client isn't so good at using a heart rate monitor. Maybe they aren't so good at tying things specifically to their heart rate. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that, right? You can be like, all right, well, in your brain, what do you think is a 13? What do you think is a 15? And the more you use the RPE scale, the more you can actually like dial that in, and it'll get more and more accurate the more you use it with your client, because they'll get more familiar with the scale. They'll be like, that was actually pretty easy. And it's like, really? Because I told you to work at a 15. It's like, did that feel like a 15? They're like, nah, it kind of felt like a 12. And it's like, all right, well, let's go get some heavier weights, right? And you go grab a lighter pair or a heavier pair. So often referred to as the Borg scale, it's 6 to 20 to measure intensity. 6 is complete rest. 20 is maximum effort. So 20 is like you're gonna, lose your lunch all over your shoes, and 6 is you're taking a nap in the gym, or taking a nap at home. Literally, you're sleeping. Not literally, not figuratively, literally. Like 6 is nothing. There is also the modified Borg scale. We have modified this because, yeah, honestly, freaking 6 to 20 is a really weird number. So there is the modified Borg scale, which is, 1 to 10. 1, and this only refers to exercise. So we're not taking into account, sleeping anymore. But number 1 is basically, you're sitting upright. 2 is light activity that you could be able to do for like a couple hours, right? So a 2 to 3 on the Borg scale would be like, if you were maybe like watching kids, and for the most part you're spending it sitting, but then like every now and then you get up to, play with them, and then you sit back down. That's light activity. Moderate, which is 4 to 6, is like, okay, you're breathing a little bit harder, right? Like your heart rate's elevated, you're breathing a little bit hard, but you're still able to like hold a conversation. It's a little bit more challenging. Maybe this is something like, walking at the gym, right? I feel like whenever I'm describing like the Borg scale that I actually use with my clients on 1 to 10, their warm up should be somewhere between like a 4 and a 6. It's like, yeah, I couldn't do this for a couple hours, but I could probably do this very easily for an hour, right? Great, that's a good warm up pace. Then we have vigorous activity, which is like a 7 to 8. And that's where it's like, okay, you're starting to get a little bit out of breath now. Maybe even speaking in like broken sentences, right? It's getting uncomfortable how difficult the exercise is. That's a 7 to 8 on the Borg scale. A 9 is very difficult. That's where it's like you can barely breathe. It's really freaking rough. And then a 10 is literal maximum effort, right? Completely exhausted, cannot do anything. Now, that's the Borg scale and the modified Borg scale. Pairing up with this is also the talk test. And the talk test is going to measure your intensity based on how difficult it is for your client to speak. You can tell we kind of already started using that a little bit, right? We kind of break it into 3 categories. There is low intensity, which is your client should be able to hold a conversation comfortably. Maybe they're a little breathy, but like they're able to talk the whole time. If you were walking next to someone on a treadmill for 30 minutes and you can hold a conversation, that's low intensity. Medium intensity is like, okay, you can speak, but like it's a little uncomfortable. and the sentences are a little bit broken, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, I can do that for a while, you know, like you're kind of like you're breathing a little harder, but like you have to take little pauses, like to kind of get a breath in, right? That's medium intensity. And then high intensity is like, nope, if I speak, I'm gonna vomit. You know, like that is you working as hard as you can. So that's the talk test, and it's heavily associated with the RPE scale. So again, if you get a question on your test that says like your client is speaking but in partially broken sentences, this is an example, and so you rate them as like using you rate them at a medium intensity. Which of the following intensity prescription methods is this an example of? You know, and then you would have like option A, which would be the RPE scale. Option B would be the talk test. That's our right answer. If they said the percentage of 1 rep max, that's obviously not right. VO2 max, that's obviously not right. Yeah, VO2 has to do with breathing, but you know, we're literally gauging the intensity on like how well our client can speak, you know? So that's the talk test. Excuse me. Then we have METs, right? Metabolic equivalents, right? Target METs are a little bit abstract in terms of a concept. Like this seems like kind of an odd concept sometimes when I describe it, but what a metabolic equivalent is, and you can see the physiology, the kind of math behind this here. A MET is a metabolic equivalent. It's the measurement of energy expenditure of a specific activity in relation to how much like oxygen you are consuming, right? So 1 MET is where you consume 3.5 milliliters of oxygen for every kilogram of your body weight. So if you weighed 100 kilograms, right? And you, or if you consumed, let's say you consumed, hold on, sorry, 1 second. I need to kick a dog out. Sorry. Hey, get her. Sorry about that. So a metabolic equivalent is like for every kilogram of body weight that you have, for every 350 milliliters of oxygen you're consuming. So if you weighed 100 kilograms and you were consuming 3.5 milliliters of oxygen, and in 1 minute's time, you consume 350 milliliters of oxygen, you're sleeping. You're completely at rest, right? That's 1 MET per minute, okay? If you were consuming, let's say, 28, right? So 100 kilograms times 28, well, then, you know, you just consume 2,800 milliliters of oxygen per minute. Okay, well, then you were working out at 28 METs, right? So that's kind of an interesting scale here. I will say they're easier to understand when you are looking at it from this version here. Like I actually find METs to be kind of hard to understand when I first look at them. But if we look at like, but it becomes a lot easier to understand when you break it down like this. So let's say you're doing the carpet, you're sweeping, which is, they got a picture of like vacuuming here, which I find funny. That burns about 3.3 METs per minute. So what that means is like, oh, okay, I'm burning 3.3 times as much oxygen as I would have compared to sleeping. Like sweeping your floor or vacuuming your floor is 3.3 times harder than sleeping, right, for your body. So you're going to burn that many more calories, right? Or if you're playing with your dog, it's like 4. If you're washing your car, it's 4.5. Moving furniture, 6 METs per minute, right? Those are all like at-home activities. But let's go ahead and look at it in terms of like exercise. All right, if you're doing like a Pilates classes are really great for your core. They don't burn that very many calories though. So you're only working at about 3.5 METs per minute. this would be a great low intensity activity for a client who's just beginning exercise, because we can tell this is not going to make them completely out of breath. Walking, it's about a 5 mets per minute, right? It's a little bit more intense than moving furniture, because you're walking briskly at 4 miles per hour. It's about 5 mets, right, on average. Weightlifting, you can see is like a 6, so we're getting a little bit higher there. Swimming, it's about an 8. Doing like a boot camp is about also about an 8. And then if you're running like a 9-minute mile, you're at about 11 mets per minute. So you are working about 11 times harder than you would be, right? So those are different methods for prescribing intensity. Now, the rest of this PowerPoint is going to kind of spend some time looking at specific diseases. I'm going to move through these a little bit quickly rather than spending too much time on each of them. You're actually not going to be tested on these diseases in this course. You'll be tested on them in the special populations class. So we're not spending as much time on these right now, and so I'm going to kind of move through them a little bit quickly. But do you guys have any questions on prescribing intensity or anything? Anything like that? Nope. Radio silence today? All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at heart disease here. So when it comes to heart disease, right, we are talking about any condition that affects our cardiovascular system. So one of those things is going to be atherosclerosis, okay? Atherosclerosis is an inflammatory disease in which your blood vessels start to develop plaque on the inside, and then that actually causes your immune system to inflame the area, because that's what your immune system does, right? Your immune system, whenever something's going wrong in your body goes, I don't know, put some stuff around it. And so it causes inflammation, right? So that's an inflammatory disease, and it happens in your blood vessels. That will raise your blood pressure, right? We've also got coronary heart disease, right? Atherosclerosis can be an example of, what will lead to coronary heart disease, right? Where basically we are blocking the arteries in our heart, and then our heart cannot get sufficient oxygen delivery, and then, dies, right? That's definitely not very good. Then we've got, but we know that like both atherosclerosis and coronary artery disease or coronary heart disease your risk factors for mortality associated with that can be reduced through regular exercise. So exercising regularly is an effective way to like lose weight. When you lose weight, that makes it easier for you to move. The more you move, the better it is for your heart. Not to even mention the fact that like exercise actually burns up cholesterol and converts it into like hormones, which now you have less passive cholesterol in your blood. That lowers your cholesterol, which lowers your risk of plaque buildup. Literally everything is good. And then also, sorry, another reason why exercise is so good. You think about like where you've only got so much blood in your body, right? When you're at rest, like right now, you are in rest and digest mode. All of your blood flow is going to like your central organs to like process food and stuff. If you start physically exercising, that blood flow now will go to your skeletal muscles instead, which is great because like that's going to reduce how much blood, that reduces blood flow here. That opens up blood vessels here. Then when you're done with exercising, it'll go back to your organs. So you're actually training your blood vessels. You're getting them to contract and restrict and dilate, right? You're getting them to contract just like you would muscles. That lowers your blood pressure. So that's another benefit of exercise. That's actually why we do what's called a peripheral heart action circuit, where we do upper body exercises, then lower body. We go up and down and up and down and up and down. And what that does is that sends blood flow here, and then it sends it over here and over here. You're literally doing reps for your blood vessels, right? Constricting, dilating, constricting, dilating. So that's really good. And it reduces your risk of heart attack, right? Or myocardial infarction. This is an incredibly dangerous condition, right? A heart attack Remember, your heart is literally going to pump blood throughout your entire body. Like, what's so bad about having a heart attack? Well, it keeps you from being able to deliver oxygen anywhere. Um, I'm a little biased here because my dad's a truck driver, but my dad has said this for years. He's like, if the trucking industry goes south, it would ruin literally everything. Like part of what made America like so successful is the fact that we built like a highway system and it became easier for us to friggin' deliver stuff. Super biased. But like, it's a good point. If you shut down the heart and you can't deliver stuff anymore, that's it. All the tissues in the body struggle. So obviously, like exercising regularly, developing your skeletal muscle can improve all of this, right? Regular exercise builds your muscles. Using your muscles, that accumulates like muscle protein rather than like, using it as lipoproteins, right? Which again, cholesterol, right? Which we're trying to avoid. So we are trying as often as possible to develop strength in a lot of our senior clients, but really just any of our clients in general, right? Remember, strength is the how much force your muscle can generate. And obviously this is going to be affected by like your age and your gender and, what type of training you've done and things like that. But like the end of the story is like our goal is to build as much strength in our clients as possible, right? And so we're going to do this through developing endurance. We're going to do this by developing power, right? Endurance is very good. Power is very good. Using those anaerobic energy systems. So in general, when it comes to like prescription for exercise training, if we're just trying to get somebody physically active in the beginning, you're going to pick a resistance that they can do it for around 10 repetitions. That's not high repetitions. That's not low repetitions. It's kind of right in the middle, which is going to be safest for most of our brand new clients. And chances are you're only going to do one set each time. Then you can start getting into like a multi-set system, which multiple sets has been shown to be one of the most effective tools. Single sets just isn't a single set just isn't enough growth to experience, or isn't enough stress to experience like growth. But it can be enough to get neurological growth. So are you going to build a lot of muscle by doing like one set of something? Probably not. But are you going to learn how to do the movement? Yes, you will. So for beginner clients, a single set 10 repetition program can be really effective. I would count this as clients who are below phase 1. If I had a client who really isn't even ready for like a full OPT workout, and I were just trying to break them in and get them used to like, they've never exercised before, and I'm just trying to get them to start being physically active, I would start on a single set 10 repetition program. Once they're used to that, then I can take them into the stabilization routine where maybe we do 2 sets of 12, and then we work on building their endurance, not getting heavier with the weight, but we go from 12 reps in week 1, maybe we'd raise it up to 15 reps in week 2, 18 reps in week 3, and possibly even 20 reps all the way in week 4. Or maybe I go from 12 reps up to 15, and then the next week we go to 3 sets of 12 and then 3 sets of 15. So there's a lot of different ways you can progress your client depending on like what it is that they need. So obviously what's that going to do? Well, it's going to prevent different diseases. It's going to reduce our risk of arthritis, that chronic breakdown of tissues in the joints, which lead to inflammation and pain and loss of range of motion. It's going to reduce our risk of asthma, which is going to make it easier for our clients to breathe as they get better and develop their endurance, right? This is also goals with the asthma clients. Again, I'm not spending too much time on this today because we talk about this in special populations. But our big goal for a client with asthma is just building up their endurance. Chances are they won't be able to exercise for extended durations. They'll start to get shortness of breath after a while. So our goal is literally just to push them duration-wise longer and longer. It's like, I want you to get on the treadmill. I want you to put it at 3.5, and I want you to try to go for 30 minutes. And they're like, oh, I can't go for 30 minutes. And you're going to go, I know. But we want to accumulate 30 minutes as often as possible. So maybe it's 28 minutes, or maybe it's 12 minutes the first week, right? And then it becomes 15 the next week. And then eventually, and then we work our way up. Eventually the goal is to get to anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes in duration, 30 minutes of cardio, 60 minute strength training sessions. We know that exercise can also reduce our risk of different types of cancers, and it can also make it easier to go through cancer treatment. Cancer in particular, like the medicine for that, the treatment for that is brutal. And so it can cause like a loss of, it causes severe atrophy, and it also causes like severe restrictions in flexibility. So depending on how severe it is or where they are in their treatment, our goal is simply to help them get their endurance back. Again, very similar to asthmatics, very similar to clients we're about to see COPD, very similar to both of those. We're just trying to build their endurance, try to get them back to 30 minutes and then maybe even an hour. And try to maintain their mobility and range of motion as much as possible. So going back to yesterday's lesson, right? Applying corrective flexibility, static stretches and PNF are probably your two best tools, or maybe active stretches. COPD, we know exercise has a really positive effect on this. Again, COPD is shortness of breath. It's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So your client cannot breathe properly. It's similar to asthma, but it can also just fall into like chronic bronchitis or even, things like that. And so intermittent walking routines where maybe they only do 3 10-minute sessions, right? If that's all they can handle, fine. We'll work our way up to 30 eventually. Then we've got, like I said, coronary heart disease, high cholesterol, hypertension, or dyslipidemia. That's high cholesterol. Again, working out at intensities that are going to strengthen your heart, burn up your cholesterol as a fuel source, reduce your blood pressure. Nothing but positive benefits, right? We are a huge fan of exercise when it comes to anything related to the heart. Diabetes. Diabetes will reduce our risk of both type 1 and type 2 with physical activity. Type 1, you're not producing enough insulin. So that is tough. But being physically active with type 1 diabetes, being physically active increases all of our insulin sensitivity. All of us become more sensitive to insulin when we exercise. Why? Well, remember, like the way insulin works, right? Your pancreas creates it, and then it acts on sugar in your blood to drive it into your cells. It either drives it in and turns them to glycogen, or it drives them in and turns it into fat. So we don't want it to turn into fat. We want it to turn into glycogen. How do you make that happen? Empty your glycogen stores. The more often you can empty your glycogen stores, the more sensitive your body will be to insulin. And that's why we actually want to do high intensity exercise. We don't just want to exercise with diabetics. We want them to work at relatively high intensities that targets the anaerobic energy system. Anaerobic uses glucose as a fuel source, right? So let's burn through as much glucose as possible. So that's what we're going to go for, 30 to 60 minutes of, we can see moderate intensity activity. And then simply clients who are, is that the last one? Oh no, we got 2 more. Clients who are overweight and obese, we see benefits there, right? Obesity has been associated with high blood pressure, coronary heart disease, dyslipidemia, hypertension, a lot of what we call comorbidities, right? Or diseases that are associated with another disease. Increasing that physical activity burns a lot of energy, and that reduces your risk for obesity. Reducing your risk for obesity is going to have very, very, very positive effects on all of those areas. And so, is obesity actually what's dangerous for you? Yeah, kind of, but it's the diseases that come along with obesity is that what kills you, right? That's why we want to avoid those things. So 30 to 60 minutes of moderate activity, just burn the calories. Just burn the calories. That's all we care about. Then we got peripheral vascular disease, right? Like I said, This is going to be things like intermittent claudication, where you'll see like PAD. Right, so PAD, or peripheral arterial disease, is basically where it's a blockage of, it's atherosclerosis, just like we talked about, but it's happening in the lower legs in particular, and basically blood flow. It becomes extremely painful as like blood's moving through, and these disease, there's this hard freaking blood vessel that can't move the way it's supposed to, right? And so then like as blood's going through, like the pressure's really high, just very, very painful. These people will often have like very limited endurance, because the extra, staying on their feet will get so painful. Their legs like kind of fill with fluid and fill with blood. And so a lot of times they'll need to take like intermittent rest. That's okay. Your intensity can be moderate in like the moments you have them exercising, and then you can get them to, kind of relax in between. And then we have things like sarcopenia, right? Sarcopenia, a loss of muscle fibers, like we talked about. Generally, you're going to have to lift at pretty low intensities here before gradually going higher. If your client has never exercised before and they've atrophied severely and they've experienced sarcopenia, you're going to need to use like very low intensities and then slowly raise that over time. And then clients with spinal cord injuries. This is a tough one. Spinal cord injuries, honestly, are not even covered in your regular textbook. They don't get covered until corrective exercise. But if you have a client with a spinal cord injury, you want to be very, very, very structured about your exercise program. There's going to be a big list of exercises that you should not do, and a big list of exercises that you should do. And like, we all want to be creative when we're writing our workouts and stuff, but with spinal cord injuries or like traumatic brain injuries, we talked cerebrospinal fluid problems. There's basically certain things. A lot of the cardio is for the most part on limits. You can do a lot of, if it's running based or cardio based, for the most part for spinal cord injuries, you're going to be fine. But specific exercises where you're changing like head orientation and things like that, you need to be careful with stuff like that. Like high to low wood chops are a big no-no for clients with spinal cord injuries, because it can cause things like vertigo. God, I almost forgot the word vertigo for a second. So a lot of diseases right there at the end. Like I think I mentioned at the beginning, or at least I meant to. The biggest part of this PowerPoint is the first half. That's what you're going to be tested on in this course. The whole PowerPoint's really good, but we don't spend a ton of time on those diseases in this class. Like I just rapid fire moved through them. We have an entire class dedicated to breaking each of these down per day. So if you felt like I was moving fast today, I was, I guess, but it's because they're going to come back around later. Don't worry about like, if you're trying to absorb everything today, pay attention to the first like 20 slides of this PowerPoint. That's where the stuff we want you to really like focus on is now. But we can't talk about like exercise improving our health without talking about all of it. We just want to make sure we're not shoving all of it into your brain, all at once. So yeah, that's kind of it today, guys. Another kind of short one today, but hopefully that kind of feels good. This has been, a very technical class. We've got nutrition tomorrow, which is kind of fun. So we'll talk about nutrition a little bit tomorrow, from the perspective of like, telling people what to eat, which is kind of fun, rather than just like what's happening in the body. And then that's going to pivot us into our nutrition class coming up starting next week. All right. I guess I'll kill the recording and see you guys tomorrow.